Hello and welcome, Exiles, to my PvP specialist. This is the first time for me, and I'm calling this build the Menace, because the goal was to be an absolute menace in any PvP scenario to as many people as possible. This character features Spell Suppress cap, Glancing Blows spell block cap, and about 50 attack block. It features 13,000 life. It features Blood Notch recoup along with Petrified Blood and regular recoup to sustain 100% of damage. Essentially, if you don't hit me and kill me in one shot, I do not die. I have 90 max all res, tempered by war, and a Purity of Ice Sublime Vision. So essentially 80% of lightning damage is taken as a different element, 80% of fire damage is taken as a different element, and 50% of cold is taken as a different element to help defend against targeted penetration. Not only that, but if you were to take a chaos build against me, I am poison immune, and 90% of my chaos damage is taken as another element. So original sin, you might as well pack it up because it's not going to work. This character was in the hopes and dreams to be an absolute menace for people being able to kill it, but also I wanted it to be offensively powered. You might think of GG Noobs, that is a character made to tank. This character is designed to be very, very tanky while also maintaining a deadly ability to kill the opponents it faces. So far, the only character I haven't been able to one-tap has been Marcus's own GG Noobs, and there was a character by a person in my Twitch chat, Karonsky, using a Juggernaut, using Zabakua, Divine Flesh, stacking a bunch of life, a bunch of recoup, who I could one-shot, but I actually had to charge my Flame Blast. Most people I could just one-tap with the simple one click of Flame Blast and 4 minimum stages, so it was quite easy to see them barely come on screen and then kill them. Not only did that, most people quite frankly died to my Tempest Shield, as you might have seen with the Discharger with the bow in the first clip. For the most of the parts where I had to do these tank tests, I had to turn off Tempest Shield as to not kill the person attacking me with Tempest Shield, which is a one-link skill. The way I was able to afford such high defensive scaling while also maintaining a very solid damage number in PvP situations was through Wrathpith. One of my favorite uniques, the shield allows you to scale a bunch of life and then get spell damage and spell crit with it. Not only that, I also have a lot of strength in this build, about 800, and that gives me damage from Iron Will as well. And a decent amount of crit multi just from my multi-link wand, and because Crucible is a little bit OP. Not only does this character succeed decently in PvP scenarios, but it also is a menace to Uber bosses, being the only abilities that can kill this are quite frankly Ultimate Nuke from Eater and the Maven memory game in the second portion of the fight when it gets a little bit more dangerous, and the Brain Bomb. Outside of that, I have to stand on something like a Cirrus Degen Ground, where it disables recovery, and then I will die from that. Not only did I mention all of my recoup, I forgot to mention I also have 3k life regen and 3k ES regen, so if you're a dot build, the only way you're going to kill this character is, quite frankly, it probably has to be a physical dot, and then on top of that, you might want some reduce regenerate applications such as the Pantheon and the Mastery or the Helmet Eldritch Implicit. There are sources like that, but with all those sources, you have to get in close to apply them, and there is a good chance I can one-tap you before you even get to break my regen. To start things off, let's break down the building blocks and the conception or the idea of the character that I had here, which was to make a character that if you were to fight it in the wild, PvP, the likelihood that this build would win in a 1v1 is very high against the vast majority of builds. So that way, if eventually they make Hall of Grandmasters able to have characters with flasks, this would be an absolute menace to deal with. Now, to start things off with, one of the ways you win in PvP content is penetration. If you can penetrate the enemy's resistances, you can do a lot of damage. Now, this character specifically has a lot of damage taken as, so that way, the only way you're winning with penetration is if you have generic penetration, i.e., like the boot mod, 10% pen if you haven't killed an enemy recently. This would work, say you are a fire-based character, I convert 80% of damage of fire to another element, this penetration would still apply. But if you don't have this penetration, and you just have a bunch of fire-specific penetration, a lot of that fire pen is completely mitigated, similar to if you're facing Shaper and you're using other damage conversions, the balls that have cold pen don't really hurt that much anymore. So, how much damage taken as do we have? We have Tempered by War. So 50% of cold and lightning we take as fire. We also have a Purity of Ice Sublime Vision, so 30% of fire and lightning is taken as cold. That means if you're a Doriani's build with minus res, you take the damage as another type, and therefore that lightning damage where you don't invest in the pen, you don't invest in the lightning pen, all of a sudden you're dealing with a character that mitigates the majority of your damage, and it gets really hard to deal with. On top of that, we also have a avian twins. So normally I would just have 30% fire taken as with just the Sublime Vision, but this covers my fire a little bit more, so I actually have 80% of fire taken as another damage type. Ultimately, our weakest element is probably cold because it's only 50% fizz taken or cold taken as, but cold is a pretty hard damage type to get one-shot damage with. I think pretty much discharge is one of the skills I can think of that can do it, but outside of that, a lot of cold-based characters are based on multiple hits. Eye of Winter, I don't know freaking where I was going with that, but bow builds, whatever you name it, they're based on a lot of hits. On top of that, we also have 90 max all res, so unless you have generic pen, you're going to have a bad time. On top of all that, we are stacking suppress via one suppress node on the tree, the suppress node from Crucible, which is completely overpowered. This is probably one of the best nodes in Crucible, in my opinion. It's disgusting to get 25 suppress on one Crucible node just to make suppress a little bit worse. It's still very, very good. And then on top of that, we get a lot of our suppress on gear to suppress cap this character, so spells are going to have a bad time. Not only that, but this character also features Glancing Blows block. So even if you could one-shot this character, you would have a 75% chance if your spell build to just not one-shot the character, or 50% chance with attacks. Now granted, attacks usually are hard to get one-shot scaling. Attacks are more balanced around basically attack speed and stuff. So usually attack builds are already going to have a problem where they just simply cannot hit as hard in the vast majority of cases, but it is still possible. Granted, attacks I can't put spell suppress on, so there is that advantage there. So the idea is if you do have a one-shot character, you're going to need to invest into either the reduced block chance support gem, or you're just going to have to at least hit me 4 times before you one-shot me once if you can't get past the Glancing Blows block. You'll notice that in one of the clips, it was a Flame Blast. That character normally can one-shot me, but I think the scenario where I didn't die 7 times in a row was Glancing Blows was blocking, I think theoretically, or maybe I'm just tanky enough with Progenesis and a Frost Shield up. It could be something along those lines. I.e., you need to get multiple tries to one-shot me, and I might just hit you once, and you might just die. So that is the idea behind the damage conversion and the defensive layers. On top of that, one thing that's hard to deal with, and this is something I learned while I was playing the Righteous Fire character, where that character just has a disgusting amount of ES. Quite frankly, with PvP downscaling, when you have a character that has just a massive HP pool, it gets very hard to deal with. This character, obviously, 13k is a lot smaller than 60k. It's not as oppressive, but it has more defensive layers that still make it hard to deal with. And the other portion that this character has that the RF character doesn't is if you don't one-shot it, you never kill it. The RF character can get overwhelmed with enough DPS. This character, on the other hand, has Blood Notch on top of the Immutable Force, on top of Recovery and Petrified Blood, so I perfectly balance out all the damage I'm taking to 100% sustain. So if you're a very high DPS character, but you can't one-shot this character, you're never going to win, theoretically. So that was the idea behind this character. Originally, I thought, oh, I'm going to be really good in PvP, I'm going to grab Inevitable Judgment. Unfortunately, Inevitable Judgment specifically says enemy, monster res, and of course, PvP characters, other rogue exiles, they are not considered monsters as far as I know, so specifically I had to swap to Augury Penitence, and I had to start getting generic pen in different places. On top of all those defensive layers, we also have, of course, the Tri-Elemental Flask for damage taken as, and if you are a Chaos build, well, Inquisitor / Templars in general have a special, you don't have a chance button, which is Searing Purity. This takes 90% of chaos damage as lightning or cold, or lightning or fire, and quite frankly, you're a original sin build, or you're a poison build, or you're a chaos build, whatever, you're not going to have generic elemental pen unless you're specifically building to fight this character, and you're going to have a bad time. Mentioning poison, we are poison immune. Mentioning bleed, we are bleed immune. We're corrupted blood immune. There are some difficulties to deal with this character, and on top of it all, we have 6k regen between our life and ES regen, and that being said, we have about 70% increased regen rate, so you can't just invest into a couple sources of reduced regen rate. You need at least 3 or 4 to completely negate our regen and still be able to survive us one-shotting you in the time it takes for our RF to degen our character. That's the defensive layers of this character. Continuing the video, this character all in all was a decent success, although I did fail in a few areas. My original goal was a character that had around 20,000 life. I thought to myself, I have a strength stacker, this RF Guardian, or not RF Guardian, RF Scion, that gets to 20,000. Surely, if I have a character that has an extra gear slot for strength and life scaling, and I put all my investment into specifically life scaling, and that's what I'm focused on, I could probably beat that. Well, little did I know, it turns out strength scaling is just really efficient, and I only got to a fraction of that life total. Now, granted, I can get closer to 14k, but I'm being forced to spend 4 passives to help myself not die to the fact Blood Notch is bugged. If Blood Notch gets unbugged, all of a sudden I get 4 passives back, gets me closer to 14k. Regardless, this character, all in all, I probably could have optimized it better if I had thought in mind, let's go strength stack approach and set up my gear more appropriately for that. But that's for another time or another timeline when I want to try making a PvP build again. So this is the character, level 99, Captain Menace. This was funded via the community. This is one of the projects that I think would be fun as a community project where we invest a bunch and see what we can make. Ultimately, I like the idea of PvP as the ultimate battleground of how good you can make a character at something. There are challenges like Uber bosses where they have a specific set of conditions you have to meet to be good at them. PvP is a whole nother animal. In my opinion, it could be one of the coolest in terms of, what's the word, aspirational content of testing the limits of how good your character truly is, if they allowed Hall of Grandmasters to continue to have characters added to it and allow Hall of Grandmasters to actually be able to use flasks. Right now, Hall of Grandmasters characters can't use flasks, so when you go into Hall of Grandmasters, you have the ability to use something like a Mage Blood, whereas Hall of Grandmaster characters can't. They can't even use flasks, they can't even use like a Pathfinder Ascendancy. It'd be a complete waste of time. But I think it would be really cool. I don't know if GG's is probably not going to do it anytime soon because they got more on their plate with PoE 2, but if they ended up taking some time to update Hall of Grandmasters and continue to add the characters. For example, GG Noobs, which was submitted almost 2 years ago now, has still not been added to it, and Hall of Grandmasters is getting weaker and weaker as the player power goes up and up and up, and it becomes an easier basically fight to go and beat. But it would be cool if more characters got added to it, and it's one of those things where you could say, okay, my character can do Ubers, my character can do Deep Delve, my character can even do Hall of Grandmasters now that it has actual hard fights in there that make it a competitive and compelling thing to push your character to the next level. Something, a reason to give you to grind or to push to the next end. I know Hall of Grandmasters isn't necessarily on everybody's mind or whatever, because it's, you know, it's PvP, PvP scaling's weird, whatever it is. But I still think it would be a cool thing if they did that, just to give people another thing, another goal to strive for. And on top of that, as far as PvP scaling goes, the weird stuff that I would like to mention to you guys now, in terms of if you want to try out getting good at PvP or trying PvP in the game, there's a few rules that you need to know. Number 1, penetration is king. And it also is king when it comes to how good it is against your defenses. The reason I have Tempered by War, the reason I use a Sublime Vision with Fire and Lightning taken as, is so that way, if I come in contact with a build like Doriani's Prototype that says minus 200 res on me, I have 80% of my lightning damage taken as fire or as cold, and those resistances are 90. So he actually needs to have Global Pen, but a Doriani's build wouldn't invest in the Global Pen because it's a waste of an investment, and it counters that build. It's a way to counter something like Original Sin, where I have Searing Purity Jewels that give me the ability to take chaos damage as elemental. Now, even with all that considered, if you have all this elemental taken as other, it still doesn't work against Global Pen. So stuff like the boot enchant that says penetration, corruptions on items which say penetration, penetration just globally on the tree as well. The thing is, though, that's still a hard stat to come by. I think it's a limited stat, and the only way to get it really in droves is Omni, but usually as an Omni character, you're gonna die because you're not a very tanky build. I've very rarely, if ever, seen very many tanky Omni builds, especially to the tank that needs to happen in order to survive in a PvP arena, because the people you're fighting against, they hit back, and they hit back pretty hard, so to speak. Not only that, it is also really important to gear for defensive layers like Suppress, like less taken modifiers, things like Progenesis, if you can scale this. Obviously, as far as I know, the tankiest PvP character I've seen is Marcus's build, where he's specifically scaling Flasks effect with Progenesis. less damage taken modifiers from Mage Blood with Flask Effect, or just having a bunch of Flask Effect and scaling your Elemental Flasks help a lot. Stuff like that means a lot in PvP. What doesn't mean a lot in PvP is armor. Armor is conceptually just doesn't work in PvP because armor is calculated against your damage before it's downscaled. So if I have a character that does like 5 million damage hit, the armor is calculated against that, and the armor says, well, we do nothing in this situation. And then after the mitigation has occurred there based on the armor, based on the bigger hit, then it's downscaled after the fact. If they change armor scaling to be after the fact of the downscaling, then it becomes a lot more of a fair ball game for armor. But as it stands now, a Juggernaut walks into a PvP arena, and a Juggernaut doesn't walk out alive. That's pretty much how it goes. Real quick, gonna cut this in the video because I forgot to go over, which is ways this character can actually die. Number one is a big one-shot mechanic. I'm talking a Flame Blast min-max for DPS. I'm talking a Discharge min-max for DPS. I'm talking a Strength Stacker min-max for a one-shot slam. I'm talking a basically Totem Explode, which Totem Explode, by the way, is very easy to dodge. Same with pretty much all the trappers in my experience. Whenever I PvP to trapper, it's a pretty easy thing to dodge. And then number 5, and this was the surprising one for me, was actually an Impale build using the Impale Mastery for 20% chance to remove all the impales on an enemy and then inflict a big reflected impale damage. That actually did kill my character, and I think a legitimate one-shot. Outside of that, pretty much every other build was completely disabled by Blood Notch. The only other times people could actually kill this character was simply because Blood Notch is bugged, and they could get an initial first hit where none of the damage is recovered right away, and a second hit where they basically could kill me in a burst of damage with Blood Notch being bugged. But outside of Blood Notch being bugged, the only true characters that could kill me with a one-shot were the builds I mentioned below, unless I forgot one, which is possible, but I think that's pretty much covers it. And outside of that, there is the ability to kill me with a dot. And the only dot I ever had kill this character was a physical dot. I knew going into this character, there was a hole in my defense, which is physical dot. I'm talking Exsanguinate and Reap. I couldn't quite manage to get PDR. PDR is a very hard stat to get in, and if I think I start forcing in a bunch of PDR, I think all of my other defenses are going to suffer because of it. It's a very hard stat to invest into, and Fizz dot is not super common. That being said, I am bleed immune, I am corrupted blood immune. I don't know if that works against corrupting fever, not sure, but that all being said, a regular spell Fizz dot, Exsanguinate, and Reap, for example, can actually kill this character. This involves probably the one character I was impressed with in defense, in terms of defenses, where it wasn't just a glass cannon. All the characters that killed me, I could basically just one-tap with Flame Blast, and they were basically min-maxing into Spell Block and some dodge using Legacy Roomies and stuff to basically cheese their defensive layers in terms of they're not viable in the real game, but in PvP, they feel good against a character that's based around one-shots. But there was one character that impressed me defensively, and it was a Pathfinder with Reap that was using a bunch of ward with the Legacy Flagellant Flask, where the character wouldn't die to a one-shot of me just tapping him. I actually had to full charge. That was the one character I was impressed with defensively that actually had both offense and defense on his character, so kudos to that guy. That was the one true PvP build I was impressed with. The other ones, I think they're cool, but I think there are a lot of cheese of they don't really have real defenses, they wouldn't survive in the regular game, and they were just min-maxed for PvP type of situation. Now, the last build that could kill me outside of Fizz dot, outside of a big one-shot, is specifically a cheese character designed to kill me, which is the scenario where you basically stack as much reduced life regeneration rate as you can. This is this stat right here. Nearby enemies have reduced life regeneration rate. Essentially, with my character, I have about, I think, I have like 90% life regeneration rate or something like that, around that number, maybe 80, 70%. So if a character stacks up to 170% reduced life regeneration rate, essentially they can kill me by having my Righteous Fire kill my character. That's things like Frostbomb, that's things like Occultist, Void Beacon, I think is the node. Stuff like that, you stack enough of that, you can make my character start to degen itself by reducing my regen rate to 0, and then finishing off with a small damaging hit because I'm down to 0. Ultimately, that's specifically if you're designing a character to kill this, that is how you do it, and that's the easiest way to do it without having to min-max slowly into a glass cannon that's going to suffer throughout the game, or without min-maxing into specifically Fizz dot. That's the cases I noticed that characters that could kill me. Again, I loved doing this project. There was a lot of fun playing against a lot of guys that enjoy min-maxing for PvP. I met some cool people. The community is relatively small, and it seems like a tight-knit community, but they seem very open to help new players that are interested in PvP. And if you start checking it out, a lot of them play in the Start Arena in Standard or in queuing for 1v1s in Standard. I believe they also do that. So it's pretty cool, and they're on the Discord. I think in the TFT server, there is a PvP section where if you're curious about it, you can check it out there. And I think it's pretty cool to get into. It's a completely different type of scaling in terms of PoE. Anyways, I'm going to get back to the rest of the video that I was recording earlier. So anyways, that was my experience with making a PvP specialist. I will say this character is not specialized for actual PvE content. Although I like Flame Blast, it's a clunky skill. It's not very good for clear, and my character isn't really designed for clear, nor is it designed for single target. This does a, like, I don't know, 4 million damage per second, 5 million damage per second, something like that. It charge up, blast. I didn't really get that crazy of damage considering how much heavy I was going towards defenses, but in a PvP scenario, this can pretty much one-shot I don't know, 99% of the builds that I run into, and if they happen to be one of the builds I can't one-shot with that, I full charge, and I usually can one-shot, outside of basically a character that has no offensive and only defensive power, like a defensive specialist, so to speak. So, anyways, hopefully you guys enjoyed this video of basically a different project thinking about PvP. Specifically, this is my character, Captain Menace, or Project Menace, or whatever you want to call it, and it was for PvP, and I think it's an interesting, basically got my mind thinking differently of how do I build a character instead of the normal way to build versus normal PvE content, Ubers, and stuff like that. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. As always, thanks for watching. Take care, Exiles, and peace out.